There is a man sitting at a wooden table in the autumn of 1835. He has a pen. He has a leather-bound book. He is writing down names. Some of the names are English: Adair, Bell, Brown, Bushyhead. Some of them are Cherokee, translated for the record with a strange kind of tenderness: bird pecker, bridge maker, corn tassel, crying snake. He writes each one carefully in a firm hand, along with the number of people in the house, how many acres, how many animals, whether there is a mill, whether the family speaks English. He is not thinking about what this list will become. He is thinking about doing his job. 16,542 Cherokees. That is what he counts. Nearly 200 whites married in, almost 1,600 enslaved people, just under 20,000 human beings entered in ink across 66 pages of a single leather book, arranged neatly by state and by the river valleys where they lived. Their farms, their children, their old people, their unborn grandchildren, all of them on one list. He finishes on the 12th of December, 1835. 17 days later, on the 29th of December, a group of about 500 Cherokees will sit down in a small Georgia town called New Echota and sign a treaty that turns his book into something else. Not a census, a manifest, a shipping document, a list of who to remove. And here is the thing you need to understand before we go any further. Nearly every name in that book, and everyone connected to that name, the wife, the babies, the grandmothers, the men who could not read, was about to be forced out of their home at the point of a bayonet, marched 1,000 miles, and roughly 1 in 4 of them would not survive it. The book they call the Henderson Roll, the book they later called the Trail of Tears Roll. If your last name is Adair, if it is Ross, if it is Ridge or Ridge Walker or Blythe or Bushyhead or Bigby or Boudinot or Baldridge or Bell or Boots or Bread, you might already be a descendant of someone in that leather book. And most people who are do not know it. They just carry the name. Let me tell you what the name meant. For most of the 1830s, in the mountains of northern Georgia and eastern Tennessee and western North Carolina and northeast Alabama, the Cherokee were not what most Americans imagine when they hear the word Indian. They had written laws. They had a written language, invented by a single man in one lifetime. They had newspapers printed in that language. They had schools. They had brick houses. They had a constitutional government, modeled in part on the American one, with 3 branches and a principal chief. They had, in short, done everything the young United States had told them to do. They had adopted the forms. They had signed the treaties. They had accepted the borders. They had turned their spears into plows and their war paint into schoolhouses. They had believed that being civilized, in the language the government used, would be enough to keep them where they were. It was not enough. Because there was gold in the Georgia hills, and there was cotton land, endless dark cotton land, waiting under the Cherokee towns. And there was a president in Washington named Andrew Jackson, who did not care how many treaties had been signed, because he was a man who had built his fame killing Indians in the South, and he believed with the certainty of the righteous that the two peoples could not share the land. So a law was passed in 1830, the Indian Removal Act. And for 5 years, the Cherokee fought it, in the newspapers, in the courts, all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. And they won. The court ruled in their favor. Chief Justice John Marshall wrote it plain. The Cherokee were a sovereign nation. Georgia could not touch them. And Andrew Jackson, so the story goes, said the court had made its decision. Now let it enforce it. Which brings us back to the man at the table with the leather book. The census was ordered because the government had already decided the Cherokee were going. They just needed to know how many, and where they lived, and what they owned, so that the removal could be organized efficiently. It was the kind of question a shipping company might ask about cargo. How many crates? How much do they weigh? Where are they stored? And the census was done. And the pages were bound. And then, in that same December, a small group of Cherokee men who had decided that resistance was futile, perhaps 100, perhaps 500, no one is entirely sure, gathered in the little town of New Echota and put their names to a paper agreeing to sell every acre of Cherokee land east of the Mississippi River for $5 million. They had no authority to do this. The principal chief, a man named John Ross, opposed them. The Cherokee National Council opposed them. A petition of protest signed by more than 15,000 Cherokees was carried to Washington. That is nearly the entire adult population of the nation. 15,000 names saying no. The U.S. Senate ratified the treaty anyway, by one vote. 1. Sit with that number for a moment. Sit with what it means. Every man, woman, and child in that leather book, the babies at the breast, the grandmothers at the hearth, the young men courting girls in the summer light, every one of their fates turned on a single senator's yes. On a treaty signed by people who had no right to sign it. On a census taken by a clerk who thought he was just doing paperwork. That was the sound of a door closing. They did not know it yet. Most of them. For 2 more years, families in those valleys planted corn. They tended their orchards. They raised their children. They built new barns. Some of them read the Cherokee newspaper and worried, but most of them believed, the way people always believe, that whatever was coming would somehow pass them by. That the courts would rule again. That the Great Father in Washington would listen. That the treaty would be undone. You can almost picture it. A grandmother in a cabin near the Hiwassee River, brushing out a small girl's hair before bed, and telling her not to worry, that people had been saying this for years and nothing had happened, and the mountains had always been theirs and always would be. And the girl believing her, because grandmothers are always right about the mountains. In May of 1838, the soldiers came, 7,000 of them, under a general named Winfield Scott. They fanned out through the Cherokee country in the last warm week of the spring, and they went house to house. They took people from their fields. They took women from their kitchens. They took children from their play. They gave them no time to gather anything. A widow named Ulu Cha remembered later that the soldiers surrounded the house and took the horse first, while the family was still at work in the field. Then they took the family. She was not allowed to bring a second change of clothes. The Cherokee were driven into stockades, wooden pens, 23 of them scattered across 4 states. Some were held for a few weeks, some for months, in the terrible heat of the southern summer, with too little food and too little clean water and no sanitation to speak of. At one stockade called Rattlesnake Springs, more than 200 people died before the march even began. Dysentery, measles, the children first, and then the old. There is a story from a soldier's account of that summer that I have never been able to forget. He wrote, in a home he entered, that a small child had died during the night and the women were preparing the body for burial. He said the soldiers had to wait, that even the men who had come to drive them out could not bear to interrupt the mothers with the little one on the bearskin. That is the temperature of it. That is the human weight. By the fall, the government's original plan to send everyone by boat, quickly, down the Tennessee River, had collapsed. The rivers were too low. The heat had been too deadly. Chief John Ross, who had spent his whole life resisting this moment, finally accepted that it was going to happen and asked only that the Cherokee themselves be allowed to organize their own march. The government agreed. 13 detachments were formed, about 1,000 people each, 645 wagons for the sick and the very old and the very young, everyone else on foot. They began walking in October. They walked into winter. The route ran north out of Tennessee, through Kentucky, across the Ohio River, into southern Illinois, across the frozen Mississippi, through southern Missouri, down into what is now Oklahoma, somewhere between 800 and 1,200 miles depending on the road. In the wagons, the dying. In the mud, everyone else. The temperatures dropped through November, and by December there were people walking barefoot through sleet, sleeping on the ground without fires, waking to find that the person beside them had not woken. On one night alone, you will find this in more than one account, 22. Cherokee died from cold and sickness, in a single detachment, in a single night. The Cherokee word for the march is Nunahi Duna Dlohilu I. It does not mean the Trail of Tears, exactly. It means the trail where they cried. The place, the specific place, in the mind, where the crying happened. By the time the last wagons rolled into Indian Territory in March of 1839, roughly 4,000 Cherokees were dead. Some estimates go higher. The Cherokee Nation itself, counting the deaths in the camps and the march and the terrible first year of trying to survive in a new country, sometimes places the number closer to 8,000. Nearly half of the people whose names had been written down in that leather book in 1835. Half. Think about the number of names on the roll, 16,000. Now think about crossing out 1 in 4 of them, or 1 in 3, or 1 in 2. Every fourth line, every third line, every other line. A pen going down the page. That is what the list became. I want to tell you the part that stays with me the most, though. It is not the number. It is this. About 1,000 people did not go. They ran into the Smoky Mountains, a landscape so vertical and so dense that the soldiers, in the end, could not find them all. They hid in caves. They hid in the folds of the ridges. They lived on what the forest gave them for months, some of them for years. Their names had been written down in the leather book, and they refused to be taken, and they hid until the wagons rolled west without them. Their descendants are still there. They are called the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. They live in the mountains of western North Carolina, in a town called Cherokee, on land they eventually purchased back, 1 acre at a time, so that no white settler could take it again. They are the ones who did not go. Their language is still spoken in those hills. Their children still learn the syllabary that was invented by that one man in one lifetime, almost 2 centuries ago, in the years before the leather book. And in Oklahoma, where the wagons finally stopped, where the survivors rebuilt a nation from the smoke of what had been taken, the descendants of the ones who did go are still there too. Hundreds of thousands of them. The Cherokee Nation is one of the largest tribal nations in North America. The names in the leather book are their names: Adair, Ross, Ridge, Blythe, Bushyhead, Bell, Bigby, Boots, Bread, Baldridge, Boudinot, Watie, Burnett, Carter, Campbell, Big Feather, Bird Pecker, Bridgemaker, Corn Tassel, Crying Snake. Every one of them, in a way, a small refusal. Every one of them, spoken today by a mother to a child, or by a teacher to a class, or by a genealogist to a stranger who came in wanting to know where their family began. Every one of them, an argument with the ledger. An argument with the treaty that 500 people signed for 16,000. An argument with the single Senate vote. An argument with the wagons and the snow and the 22 dead in one night. The clerk with the pen did not know, in the autumn of 1835, that he was writing a death warrant. But he was also, without knowing it, writing something else. He was writing a memory. He was writing down which families had been where. He was writing down, in a book that would outlive him, the names of people the government was about to try to erase from the land. And here is the strange, quiet mercy of that leather book. It failed at what it was meant to do. The removal did not erase the Cherokee. It did not empty the mountains. Some stayed. It did not sever the line. The names kept going. In fact, the very list that was compiled to make removal efficient became, later, one of the most important records descendants used to prove they were Cherokee at all. When people today apply to the tribal rolls, when they trace their families back through the generations, the leather book is often what confirms them. The instrument of removal became the instrument of remembering. If you have Cherokee ancestry, and many Americans do, many more than know it, there is a real chance the person you descend from is in that book. Not because your family was less than any other, because your family was there. Because someone with a pen sat at a wooden table in the autumn of 1835 and wrote a name down, and the name traveled through everything that came next, and the name reached you. That is what a name is. Not a label. A survivor. Somewhere right now, a genealogist is opening the scanned pages of the Henderson Roll on a screen and running a finger down a column of Cherokee families in a Tennessee River valley and finding a great-great-great-grandmother listed as the head of a household of 6 on a farm of 30 acres, 3 days east of the road that would later become the trail. Somewhere right now, a grandmother is telling a small girl about the mountains, and this time, the mountains really are still theirs. The clerk closed the book at the end of the year, and nearly 2 centuries later, we are still opening it.